Carol, can you take a moment then to offer some guidance on how to determine areas for goal writing and even considerations perhaps for the whole IEP team discussion?
Sure. There are so many things that could potentially be taught. And what we have to do is be careful that we limit the areas to what we can reasonably be expected to achieve, or the student can achieve, and what can reasonably be expected to be taught within a year. So we want to stand back and take a look again at the PLAFFs. Now, let's please be clear that we're not going to go back and do this again. We've already collected information during the present levels of performance, discussion, and description. So we use that same data. But now we look at it and we review the areas that we determined are going to need instruction. And some of the things to think about in terms of determining areas of need, which would be things like which are going to have the greatest impact. If you recall the standards that we used back in the module on the present levels, there were a lot of interim steps that were listed for a 5th grade reading, for example. It's probably not going to be possible to teach everything. Or when we go back and we look at all the prerequisite skills, it's not going to be possible to teach every single prerequisite skill. So we need to look at those areas that are going to have the greatest impact. That is, which of those that are going to most likely allow for the student to be successful in the general classroom, so that we can narrow them down, because there's a lot of interim steps that we won't be able to touch on. We also want to make sure that we're really looking at those that are going to require specialized instruction, because if the student can get the information or come to a level of performance that's acceptable with an accommodation, then we want that child in with his peer or her peers in the general classroom. We want to choose standards also that are most essential to accelerating the student's ability to progress in the general curriculum. So again, we want to not necessarily look at every single one, but which have the greatest strength, which will result in educational benefit. There may be a difference between actual performance and the expectations of the standards, and so we need to make sure that we're looking at those that are going to actually lead to the performance. A third step that we want to do is we want to really actually unpack the standard. It's quite possible you've already done this unpacking when you looked at sub-skills in the present levels of performance. So it might not be that you're doing this again, but if you didn't do it during present levels of performance discussion, you will want to make sure that you want to go back and look at those standards and break it down into sub-skills areas.
Okay. Well, as I think about identifying those critical skills, my sense is that could be a little bit challenging. Can you provide me with some guidance or some direction on how to do this?
Okay. We want to, again, identify the critical skills that are most likely going to impact the student's ability to demonstrate proficiency. Okay. So here are some questions that we can think about. So one of the questions would be, what skills and knowledge are really essential? I hate to say that the information that are in the standards that contain things that aren't important. It's all important. But I do believe we'll find that some are more essential, and sometimes there's sort of a duplication in there. So you want to weed that out, and you want to make sure that you're not looking at each individual isolated thing, combining things that are alike, and really looking for the most critical for getting to those standards. And also critical to the desired vision or the instructional outcome you're trying to achieve. We also want to make sure that they're challenging. I think sometimes in the past in special education we've had a tendency to think that what we were doing was important because we were operating in isolation and we are often comparing our students with themselves instead of comparing them with students who are in the general classroom. So we want to make sure that we're choosing areas that are attainable for the student, where the data tells us it is attainable, but yet challenging, because we want to set those standards. And again, essential to the participation in the general curriculum, which are going to be the most essential. We want to think also about the possibility of modified performance standards. For example, in every state's standards, you have what are called the content standards, and then you have the performance measures, the standards by which a student is going to be determined whether or not they've met the content standards. Well, maybe it's a modification of the performance standards that needs to be adjusted as opposed to the content itself. And then again, thinking about using accommodations. Are they relevant to this student? Are they reasonable? Or another way of saying reasonable, are they attainable within 1 year? Yet will they be challenging? And can they be attained in the time that's given, whether it's a year or even a shorter period of time? Sometimes when you look at the areas, though, you'll still find that even after all that consideration and even looking at what's essential, you still might have a lot of areas. And you may say, we really can't do all of these in a year, and you have to prioritize even further. So you might want to think about which of these is going to really impact on each need of in terms of the student's progress. The areas that are probably going to have the greatest impact are ones that you want to choose. And you want to develop the goals accordingly. So go back to the needs statement that you came out of your present levels with, and really look at which of those needs are most critical to students' ability to progress in the general curriculum. So this is a good time to do a little activity. It's called the Prioritize activity. You have the IEP worksheet that we have provided for you, and I hope that you've been using it through the second module, and now's the time to take it out and look at the information that you noted thus far on your present levels of performance. And a good time to look at all of that data and identify some potential target areas that you think will warrant specialized instruction. Areas that are relevant to the student, reasonable yet challenging, and attainable within 1 year, as well as areas that will most likely enable the student to progress in the general curriculum. And when you're finished, you come back and we'll get started again on the last part of writing goals.